Kakwa alabin shnuknukwa, inchash tmukta, litwa ushkan, shtatlinkan, ukumukkan, Shama and Squaticha Irene. So what I just said was, hello everyone, my ancestral name is Tmukta, translates to of the earth. I come from the Littlechild Nation, which is a part of the Statlium territory, also known as Mount Currie, and my English name is Irene. I am a cultural ambassador from the Squamish Littlechild Cultural Center. Just came here to welcome you all to the unceded territory of the Squamish and the Littlechild. At the beginning of pretty well every gathering, every welcoming, any type of welcoming really, we always like to start by singing a traditional welcome song. The song that we'll be sharing with you today, it comes from the Littlechild Nation and is known as the Groundhog Song. The groundhog is actually known as a whistling marmot. That's actually why Whistler is called Whistlers, because of these little whistling marmots that we have. They'll poke out of their little dens at the top of Whistler or Blackcomb Mountain and let out a little territorial whistle. I hope you enjoy. Thank you everyone for having us here. I hope you enjoy the event tonight.
My name is Dave Williamson. I'm the chair of the Whistler Institute Board. The Whistler Institute is dedicated to influencing change and inspiring minds through learning and thought leadership. Over the past 3 years, we have hosted important online and in-person discussions on global themes with a local impact, and tonight's event could not be more relevant.
I'm so honored to be able to be with you today on the Squamish and Littlechild territory, and I'm really excited to welcome the people I'm going to. So I'll sit down here and I'll invite our panel to join me. Welcome to you all. Come on out. Welcome, everyone can come. I'll introduce you one by one. Hello. So as they sit down, this is Hannah Burns. And she has worked in, everyone knows that the Prime Minister was here last week. She didn't work in that Prime Minister's office, but she has worked in the Prime Minister's office. Better than that, she worked with Hockey Canada. You are hearing a theme here. She is Canadian, which is interesting. We couldn't have Christophe Duby here, but for the last 14 years, Hannah has been working with the IOC in Europe, and she has flown in to be with us today, so please welcome Hannah Burns. Beside her is Tricia Smith. Tricia Smith is a lawyer and a businesswoman. She lives in Vancouver, but Whistler is a long home for her family. She is a silver medalist in rowing, and she is the president of the Canadian Olympic Committee, so please welcome Tricia Smith. Beside her is Chelsey Gotell. She is the chairperson of the International Paralympic Committee Athletes Council and a member of the IPC Governing Board, IOC's Athletes Commission, and World Anti-Doping Agency Athlete Committee. She's a 12-time Paralympic medalist and a member of the International Paralympic Committee. Please welcome Chelsey Gotell. Dave said at the beginning we have two special guests, so Hannah's the first. The second is Chief Wilton Littlechild. He is the Grand Chief of the Confederacy of the Treaty 6 First Nations. He's a retired member of Parliament for Wetaskiwin. I heard you say the word. You're going to have to tell us later how to say Wetaskiwin. He's a commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, a Pearson Peace Medal recipient, and a member of the Canada Sports Hall of Fame. Please help me welcome Chief Wilton Littlechild. So at the Whistler Institute, we really enjoy learning together. We like thinking through things together. And I hope we can now ask you, Tricia, to sort of set the framework for us. Why sport? What makes it special? What makes it important? What makes you give your life to the Canadian Olympic Committee?
That's dramatic.
It is. That's what I'm here for, drama.
I think I'm like probably most of the people, if not all the people in the room here. I'm a big sport fan, and I've had sport in my life. I was fortunate my parents were both into sport, and my family was in sport, and my brothers convinced my parents to come up here in the 70s, and skiing is great, we've got to come up here, and someone had to actually pick us up halfway down the mountain, or the highway, because the car couldn't go any further. So I'm a big sport fan, and I have been involved in sport in my life, and as an athlete first, and then as an administrator, because I want everyone to have the experience that I had. And Nelson Mandela said it: "There's nothing like sport to bring the world together." It's a language that, and Chief Littlechild says this is a language that children all understand. There's nothing as powerful as the Olympic Games. 206 nations, more than the United Nations, that meet together and bring the youth of the world together to exchange views on, they'll be in the cafeteria together, watching the screen together, and say, "Holy smokes, did you see that?" And all of the athletes of the world together, like, there's nothing like that. So that's why I volunteer in sport. And one story I tell is the International Olympic Committee started a refugee team for athletes who had lost their countries. And there are many, as you know, and more every day. And the first team was in Rio, and I remember hearing one of the athletes from the refugee team say that just being able to participate and compete in sport again made him feel human again. And it's just so powerful, and it's why I volunteer in sport.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Chief Littlechild, you talk about the power of sport often, and one of the phrases I've heard talked about by you and others is reconciliation through sport, and the importance of sport in the lives of people who have experienced great trauma. Talk to us about your view of the power of sport in people's lives.
Well, first of all, nigan gakio tatamaskar na. Begom stugaski kanosota kankamok nanaskumon. First, I greet all of you in my language, Maikant Moteon Sigason. My Cree name is Walking Wolf, and my residential school name was number 65. I was acknowledging the sacred drum and thanking the drummers and singers of our sacred songs to begin the evening tonight, and also to thank you, Madam President, for doing the protocol in advance, so that I want to thank the keepers of these territories, the Squamish and Lillooet. They go hangay toan ka kweskse ayak auye ka kwesksit. I just said to you in Cree what Whistler sounds like in Cree. Ana ka kwesksit. Ka kwesksit means the Whistler. So your worship, may I just pass that on to you. But yes, I think that sport has a tremendous power to answer the question or the theme that's above us, behind us. And I think that the more we can design ways to work together, I think we have the opportunity in this unfortunate situation we find ourselves globally. By that I mean this morning, for example, another 15 little children were found by a residential school that had gone missing. So that really, for me, brings out the importance of reconciliation. But sport, as President Tricia said, has the power to change the world. And when we're looking for the situation to improve globally, like what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine right now, I'm saddened because of two things. One, the Olympic truce was violated during this time. And as I understand the Olympic truce, it's for peace, for the world to put their arms down during the games and have peace. The second reason is I come from a treaty territory as a chief. And our chief, with our ancestors, signed a sacred agreement many years ago, 1876, that we would have peaceful coexistence. So when you see the breach of the Olympic truce, the breach of treaty, as our forefathers agreed to do with newcomers to share the land and live together side by side peacefully. So I see it, by pointing that out, I think we of all people, I'll say, in the world, have this opportunity, which is also a challenge, to answer that question. What can we do to make the world better? And reconciliation, I was speaking once, actually, Your Worship, and I was trying to hurry up with my presentation. and I said,
Take your time.
it's all about reconciliation. I was referring to the calls to action that we had made as a Truth Commission, having gone across the country, and thank you, Clara, for all your help during that journey, difficult journey, to listen to over 7,000 stories of abuse of children, including myself. That's why I identify myself as number 65, because that's the first thing that was taken away from you was your name, your identity, the very essence of who you are. But sport can put it back. I remember one man saying, when I was 10 years old, I ripped out my heart and threw it under the stairs of the church by the school where I was violated, but turned instead to addictions, drug addiction, alcohol, violence of all kinds, being in prison. And one day I woke up that it's up to me. It starts with me. And I went back to that church stairs, I picked up my heart and I put it back in. And that's when I started healing for peaceful coexistence, for reconciliation. I had an opportunity to meet with His Holiness Pope Francis a couple of weeks ago. Some may have seen the media, but it was a private audience. And I was telling others that rarely does a pope give half an hour to a world leader like a president, prime minister, ambassador, but he gave us 5 hours to listen to our stories of what happened to us as children. And when I spoke to him, I quoted Nelson Mandela advising boldly His Holiness that he needs to look to other kinds of ways to bring the world back together. And I quoted Nelson Mandela because he was made an honorary Canadian when I was a member of Parliament, and I heard him speak. And what he says, and what's often quoted, is the sport has the power to change the world. Sport has the power to inspire. Sport has the power to bring community together. Sport talks to children in a language they understand. And I thought that was such an important encapsulation. And as I was leaving the IOC building in Lausanne, His Excellency, the President Bach, said, "Give my regards to the Pope, we're good buddies." So, while it was a very serious situation, everyone acknowledged it, but I said to the Pope, "I bring you best regards from His Excellency President Bach of the International Olympic Committee." And you could see a little smile. And I said, "I know you're a very great soccer fan. So, but what I want to say to you is I come here asking you to come to Canada to apologize to the survivors for what happened to them as children. I want you to come and support and endorse the 10 principles of reconciliation, which, by the way, are now global principles for reconciliation, adopted by the UN. And then I said, the calls for justice by the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls must be dealt with. And lastly, as I looked at him, I said, I want you to say 3 words: I am sorry. So the next day, and before I talk about that, in residential schools, we never had birthdays acknowledged for some reason. I'm not sure why. We started acknowledging birthdays of survivors in Yellowknife. And it brought me back there because April 1st was my birthday. And that's the day he said, I'm very, very sorry. He said, I am very sorry. He added on emphasis to the word very sorry because of what happened to us. And he did make the commitment that he is coming to Canada to apologize to the survivors who are still with us. We lose about 4 a week that go on their spirit journey. So it's important that he comes soon, that he addresses the survivors. And when you say, what is reconciliation? You ask, what does it look like? And I tell this story because of this worship. We have a city beside my reserve. I see, by the way, there's a lot of reserves here in the hall. But anyway, next to my reserve, there's a city called Wetaskiwin. But it's the most mispronounced city in Canada. It's Wetaski win. People say Wetaskwin, but Wetaski win means having good relations. And that's what reconciliation is about. It's about finding ways to restore respectful relationships. And I think this challenge offers us that opportunity. You, distinguished people from the Olympic movement, and others that are in the audience, dignitaries, I believe we together can answer that question, because the key to true reconciliation is working together. And our original treaty called on us to work together. So that's what I would put out as a plea to all of us to ponder. Let's think of how we can improve the world by working together. Restore those respectful relationships that were there once. Let's not forget the children that never made it home. I was blessed to be able to make it home after 14 years in 3 different residential schools. But it was sports, mainly hockey in my case, that saved my life. That's why it's so important, I think, that we consider working together. Let's work together on this journey of the Olympic movement, the power it has, and whatever we can do to uplift it and help us work together. I think we'll find that peaceful coexistence. So thank you very much. Hi, hi.
Thanks for coming. Have a great night. Chelsey, I think what I want to turn to you with is this concept of working together. I think that the COC and the CPC and the IOC and the IPC have worked together to promote the opportunity for people. So tell us about how that working together has worked itself out and what changes you are seeing as a result of the work of the IPC and the IOC.
Absolutely, it's a great question. I was going to say that it's very tough to follow your words. So thank you for everything you just shared, Chief Littlechild. It's extremely powerful, and as a person with a disability, it really resonates with me, and understanding, not being able to appreciate somewhat the difficulties and the trauma that you've been through, and looking at the global scale of how people with disabilities are marginalized within every community. So thank you for your commitment to Canada and to the sport movement and helping. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
For me, I started swimming I found Paralympic sport in 1999. My first games was Sydney in 2000. And at that time, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, it was a really hard choice to even try to find the funds to send a team with Canada kit to the games. Mm-hmm. And I was a 14-year-old athlete. It was my first games. I didn't understand everything that was going on, let alone I got a big basket of a box of Team Canada clothing, and that was amazing. To reflect on that 22 years later and to see how far the Paralympic movement in Canada has come and how far the relationship between the Canadian Paralympic Committee and the Canadian Olympic Committee has come, it creates a fire inside of me that as an athlete I never appreciated how powerful that could be. And I think it's just really starting to bloom at a level that is just going to elevate both movements to a place of excellence, a place of professionalism, a place of leadership within the global sport community, of how the two organizations can work together and uplift the entire sports movement. At the international level, it's definitely been a really interesting road to navigate how the IOC and the International Paralympic Committee work together, because we are two distinct movements, like here in Canada, but we're heavily tied together in that the games are held in the same host city. But that's something that we can't take for granted, because it wasn't like that in the past. This is a fairly new thing within the Olympic movement's time frame, and the Paralympic movement is much younger. So the growth of the Paralympic movement is heavily tied to the relationship with the International Olympic Committee and all of the National Olympic Committees and Paralympic Committees around the world. Because at the end of the day, our games wouldn't be able to survive on their own at this point in time, where we are in development. And it's a harsh reality of the Paralympic movement that we're still very young. We're 80 years old. We came out of the games, we came out of World War II. So we're really in the infancy when we think about developing Paralympic sport around the world and inclusion for people with disabilities at the larger scale of discussion. And the relationship with the International Olympic Committee has really helped propel that conversation further to help open up new doors. The hosting end of things is vital for us. I think the partnership is really two ways, in that we're able to utilize the inclusion agenda together. We're able to utilize how we work together to work with governments around the world to make change, to change policy and advocacy, to really change the host cities for the better, rather than just coming in and putting on the games and leaving, and there's not really much left behind. So it's been a huge growth over just 22 years that I've been involved. So I can't imagine 20 years before that to look at how far it's come since over the last 40 years. It's just incredible to see, and I think that the concept of 2030, and even just the foundation that we have right now with working with the 4 host First Nations, working as a partnership and really doing this together, it's so powerful. It's something that hasn't been done before, and I think it's really going to set the trend for future potential bids and potential games hosts down the road. No pressure, Hannah.
Thanks. Thank you.
It's really incredible, and I'm just honored to get to be part of it.
Thank you very much. Hannah, you hear this world-changing story of sport and of the IOC, and we had the chance to talk earlier about the question, is the IOC a political organization? So answer that question. Is the IOC a political organization? Why not?
No.
Okay. All right.
No, and I know most people are perhaps surprised in that answer. For me, we're not a political organization in the sense that we do not get involved within political debates. Have we held games in countries where there are discussions of politics? Are there discussions of politics here tonight? Yes. But we, as the International Olympic Committee, the IPC, have a certain remit of responsibility and what our role is, and our role is to organize the Olympic Games and to work with the host countries, the cities, the sports organizations to make change. But no, we are not a political organization.
Mm-hmm. And so when you think through the, current events when a games happens, obviously there's adjustments that need to be made on the fly as you respond to changes on the ground. How engaged are you in current events leading up to a games and during a games?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in this day and age, I think every organization, every person, we are much more connected now than we have ever been. And while we are not a political organization, we are an international organization. And Tricia mentioned that at the Summer Games, you have athletes and representatives of athletes from 206 countries. Yeah. There, when you think about what is happening around the world and comes together within one location, I mean, that in itself, is certainly a unification of the world coming together. So I think for me, we need to be aware, we are informed, we're up to date, we are, and we make it a passion of ourselves and to know information and to have information. But, I think that's the reality of society today anyway, is to be informed and to be informed about what is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll move to Tricia and just say, mayors say strange things. I'll just grant off the beginning. And it was the mayor of Montreal, Jean Drapeau, who said, the Olympics can no more lose money than a man can have a baby. So whatever you want to say about men having babies, Mayor Drapeau has been proved wrong on the Olympics losing money in towns. So talk to us about the changes that have happened and are happening to address that, and what has changed about the games to make sure that communities are protected as we put games on.
Sure. I mean, so much has changed since then. 1976, that was my first Olympic Games. There 20% of the athletes were women, 20%. And yeah, I remember looking at pictures of us marching in the opening ceremonies, and oh, there's a small group of women there at the front of the contingent. So much has changed, and Hannah can talk to this probably better than I can, but the IOC doesn't insist on certain things a certain way, and you just make that happen. It's not that way anymore. It's if a community wants to host an Olympic Games and it makes sense within their community, and they're going to, if they, for example, our community, we have venues already, but if we wanted to build venues, fine, you can build them, but the IOC does not ask anyone to build venues anymore. So say, for example, we wanted to have a bid in 2030 and we didn't have a bobsleigh run. The IOC would say, do not build a bobsleigh run. Use the one in Calgary, or use the one in Salt Lake City, or use the one in Latvia. They don't want communities to build anything that you wouldn't want to build anyways. It's all about sustainability. It's all about equality. The games concept has completely changed. And maybe I'll pass it over to Hannah because she's in that department, but I've seen it, I've lived through it. I've lived through the IOC saying, change or be changed sports, be 50% women, or we'll change that for you. And I've seen the sports change, and they wouldn't have changed otherwise. So it's a huge, huge shift. So I'll pass over to Hannah because I know you've got a lot to say about this as well, living it every day.
Yeah, I think that the easiest, conceptually, the way we really talk about it is that a city no longer adapts to the game. So obviously now we talk much more just about a city, but it's really the games that are adapting to their host. And we've seen that certainly within the games that are upcoming. If we're looking at the games coming in Paris, Milano Cortina, LA, we are going into cities and contexts where we've worked with them throughout their selection process to make the most of their project within their context. We are pushing them, challenging them to look at, what do you have, what do you need, to Tricia's point. If you don't have it, you go elsewhere. You don't build it. And the only way that we would ever allow or encourage or say okay for something to be built is if there is an extremely robust and strong legacy plan. And this community is a community where you see the benefits of certain infrastructure changes that were done and were made and what that legacy is. But that is essential to us. And the process that we have put in place ensures us to thoroughly review that and what the process is, and to ensure a community thinks that through. So really it may sound like a slogan of sorts, but for us it is adamant in everything that we do, is that a city does not change for the games. It is the games that changes for a city. I think just in terms of what has changed within us as an organization, and as we look forward, we have a lot of change planned. We've committed to a lot of change, but as we were speaking about Jack earlier, when I was looking at the title of kind of tonight's session, I almost got my back up thinking, but you're not acknowledging the change we've already made. And for those in the room tonight who may have been involved in the 2010 games or other games around that period, you are looking at an organization that is vastly different when it comes to the IOC and the IPC. And you are looking at an organization that has a vastly different approach to the games. And it's really important to understand that. And I think we as an organization need to also become better at explaining that. We need to be in moments like this to be able to share and to communicate, but we need to be able to be clear in terms of the fact that things have dramatically changed in everything that we are doing. And we have set out policy papers, and they're not policy papers that sit on a bookshelf and never get looked at. We have committed to publicly addressing each of the recommendations. We made 40 in 2013, we made 15 in 2021, and we assess where are we not. And in some cases, we didn't get to where we wanted to get to. So in 2021, we recommitted to going further. And on the phone this morning, we were discussing, some further recommendations that we want to look at in games organization. So it's not because in 2021 we committed to some change that we don't already have in our minds. We want to go further. So I think it's important for people to understand we are changing, we have changed, and that change is constant and an evolution. And I think that that's partially brought on by COVID. I think it's partially brought on by the fact that we are an organization who realizes that we need and we want to change. And to Tricia's point, I think, yes, it was change or be changed, but I think that's almost shifted from we want to change. It's not necessarily feeling a pressure of needing to change any longer.
It's interesting, there's like bookends with LA. That LA made money in 1984 because it didn't build anything new, and now LA is coming with a very similar focus of not building anything. So those bookends are really a fascinating situation. Yeah.
And if I could just give you an example. So before 2010, when Vancouver, Whistler bid for the games, it was a totally different process. So leading up to the decision in 2003, first of all, Vancouver competed domestically with Calgary and Quebec to be the bid from Canada. So that cost money. You had to raise money for that. And then when they were successful, they had to go into the international competition, and that cost money. The total amount just for the bid alone was $35 million that had to be raised. That doesn't happen anymore. The IOC said, look, if you're interested in the games, talk to us, and we'll see what works for you, what works for us, and we'll move this process along. So that process is completely different. You don't have the consultants saying, we'll get the votes for you at the IOC that you're having to pay thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for. It's a completely different process. It's much healthier. It's much more efficient. It's much more sustainable.
Chief, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to point out another change. Gagwesksit, the mayor, when I was an ambassador for the 2010 Winter Olympics, my assignment for the Paralympics was to be here for 1 week. I forgot to mention that because it was such a tremendous experience for me. But go back to Montreal Summer Olympics. They were painting non-Indigenous people brown for the opening ceremonies. And right across the river was a reserve called Ganawagi, where they could have asked, join us in the opening ceremony, but instead they spray painted. And I said to myself, that will never happen again. And that's why I want to thank the IOC and COC and all the Olympians who blazed the trail for us to be included in the movement. I just wanted to reflect on that change. That has changed.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Is we talk, and I've seen some of it in action, the concept of an Indigenous-led bid. When you think through that, that's a great example of one of the ways that things have changed since '76. What else do you think about when you hear the term Indigenous-led games? Or I've heard some of the folks that I'm working with now talk about a reconciliation games. What runs through your mind when you hear those phrases?
Well, I had suggested to President Bach, and I think you'll remember, Tricia, during the Pyeongchang Games, that the Olympic theme should go beyond the Games for Peace. But the next forthcoming, is that a word? Forthcoming?
Yeah.
Ought to be about peace and reconciliation. You know, I mentioned Russia and Ukraine. There are people that are caught in the middle of that conflict, indigenous peoples, both in Russia and in the Ukraine, that I work with at the United Nations. But nobody seems to ever mention them in the conflict that's happening there now. So while change is good, sometimes change drives people to a fear of success. It's not a fear of failing, but a fear of success. And I think if we had ethical games like we proposed, then that change will come even greater and better and faster. So, thank you.
Chelsey, there's this connection to the UN SDGs, and there are 17. I thought there was 16. Apparently, I've been told by Hannah there's 17. Tell me, in your view, about that connection to moving forward sustainability and equality from the perspective of the IPC and your perspective.
Yeah, it's we've heard a few times already from everybody so far. You know, sport and change go hand in hand, and the IPC has a motto: "Change starts with sport." That's what we're standing behind right now in our current strategy, our strategic direction. We're heavily aligned with the UN on the SDGs. I think if you look at all 17 of them, people with disabilities fall into all of them. When we look at any community, people with disabilities are the most marginalized of any community. And as the Paralympic movement and the stewards of sport for people with disabilities, the question that we've had to ask ourselves is, how do we utilize our movement and the voice that we have to create change? Whether it's the host cities and thinking about accessible infrastructure or transport, but it's also about the policies in the countries in the host cities. How do we influence governments to make positive change to implement many of these SDGs? You know, I'm one of those lucky people that I come from a great nation where, having a disability, I'm very privileged to be exposed to sport. That's not the reality for many countries around the world, where people with disabilities are left at home. Mm-hmm. They're put into homes. They're not taken care of. They're left in orphanages as children. So how do we bring the games to these people? 15% of the population have a disability. That's 1.2 billion people in this world. That's 1.2 billion people to be exposed to sport, to be exposed to something that could change their lives. And I'm one of those people that I have the Paralympic flame inside of me, and I'm really lucky that I've been given that opportunity. But really, if you can't see that opportunity in front of you, how can you be it in the future? So how can we use sport to be that avenue for change? How can we align more to the UN? How can we help people with disabilities become better educated, to have opportunities to release their traumas and use sport as the vehicle to do it? It's not just about, yes, high performance sport is what we're doing. We want to inspire people through sport for people with disabilities, but it's so much bigger than that. And I think that's really the direction that, as an organization, we're going, as a sport movement, we need to be going. Because as we've all heard, we've all talked about so far, it change just transcends everything. And I think that I'm really proud to get to stand behind the inclusion agenda and stand behind the SDGs and stand beside the impact we can have really granularly within a system to create, positive impact for individual people that are sitting at home.
That's a stunning number, 1.5 billion people. That's an amazing number. Chief?
In Canada, it's 69% of the disabled are Indigenous.
Yep. Yep.
So why are we not in sledge hockey or wheelchair basketball or whatever? We're working on it.
Chief, just wait for our next panel. We're going to introduce you to an Indigenous wheelchair basketball player.
Yeah, I know who he is.
You met him. Tricia, can you wrap this up for us? What have you heard, and what do you want to share with this room of people as we move on to the next panel?
Well, I think it's clear that sport plays a huge role in bringing the world together and in the future of what's possible. I think people ask me sometimes what I hope for the Olympic and Paralympic movement for the future, and I always say, wouldn't it be great if 10 years down the road we can say, can you believe there was a time when any kid who wanted to play, any person who wanted to play sport didn't have that opportunity? Can you believe that that was possible, that people didn't have that opportunity? And that's something, as Chelsey said, we're maybe at the elite part of sport, but it's all part of a continuum, and it's so important that our communities, that our governments recognize that sport is about being human, and sport is an important part of being human, and all the positive parts of being human, and it's something that shouldn't just be put to only brought in if we can afford it. It has to be a priority in our country and in our world.
Well said. Reading all of your bios to prepare, Chelsey was an Antigonish aquanaut. So there was a discussion in our house about what's an aquanaut. I'm going to have to ask her later over wine. She can describe to me what an aquanaut is, and we can solve some Crompton debate. Chief Littlechild, your history around bringing Indigenous games was so inspiring. Tricia, you as a 16-year-old kid rowing at UBC. What jumped out at me is exactly what you've said. This is grassroots. This is kids picking up a hockey stick or a pair of skates or swim fins and getting out there and being a part of a community. And I think that you're right. It's elite at this level, but it sure hits those people that are in our communities across Canada. So I want to just thank all of you. I think, you can pass this on to Christoph, I believe that Chief Littlechild and you were an upgrade on Christoph. I really want to say well done. Thank you all. Thank you.